Hello, everyone. My name is Jimmy Smith, and welcome to the Wine with Jimmy YouTube channel and e-learning portal. Thank you so much for stopping by. So I'm Jimmy Smith, and we are looking on this section at a WSET Level 4 presentation. So this is the Diploma on Wine Production, and this is the beginning of the approaches to viticulture, to grape growing, and we will be looking at the different philosophies behind viticultural practices. So through conventional to sustainable, organic, biodynamic and precision viticulture. So all of those things. In this video, we'll be just focusing on conventional. This is the only free available video on YouTube during this series. All the others, which is sustainable, organic, biodynamic, precision viticulture, will be only available on my e-learning portal. That is the e-learning portal at winewithjimmy.com, where you can go and sign up for access to all of those exclusive videos and further content as well. If you do have any comments or questions or concerns, please do get in touch. On this video, you can comment on the YouTube run on it. So that's the comment section below this video. Also, make sure you hit the subscribe button, please. And you can also get in touch via social media that you see at the bottom of every slide, and that's also in the description of this video, or direct at winewithjimmy.com. Okay, so a little bit on conventional viticulture to begin with. So this approach is something that really began momentum with modernization and industrialization, and that is really maximizing the crop and reducing the cost, and really looking at quick fixes in the vineyard, really favoring a regular and dependable harvest. Looking at quite short-term approaches and not looking at the long-term ramifications of these actions in place. And often there is sadly little concern for toxicity of chemicals in this instance as well. Classic picture of a farmer in a vineyard spraying his vines. And of course you can see many video footage of this available on the internet. So this videos will look at these main points. So we're going to talk a little bit about the introduction of conventional viticulture, and that's through industrialization and modernization. One principal real pillar post of conventional viticulture is monoculture. So we're going to define what that is and talk about it a little bit. And then we'll go into the advantages and disadvantages of a monoculture in a vineyard. And finally, we'll talk a little bit about the impact that it has on the environment and the changes that are happening within the viticultural scene around the world. So they're our major points. So let's get stuck into talking about industrialization and modernization to begin with. So in the second half of the 20th century, viticulture, in common with production-oriented farming for other crops, so very much agriculture and intensive agriculture, underwent a significant change. It became, as I mentioned, intensive fruit farming in this instance. Of course, you'll always have smaller producers, more artisanal producers still crafting their goods, but really the new approach of this conventional industrialized and modernized way really was widely implemented around the world, really to, of course, increase production at a cheaper price. And this meant that you could reduce labor levels due to the amount of scientific technology available and mechanization, but also things through chemical inputs as well, irrigation techniques, and also things which are more scientifically based as well, like clonal selection. Okay, so that's a little bit there. Look at that rather fancy gadget in that picture. It looks a little bit far-fetched, doesn't it? It looks like it's been photoshopped, but I don't think it has been. So let's talk about monoculture. So monoculture. So viticulture at that point, then in the latter half, in the 20th century, but in the latter half of the 20th century, began to sort of change to become a monoculture. And previously, viticulture was actually a part of quite a lot of polyculture. That's being grown with other agricultural crops. So a monoculture, then, how do we define it? It is the cultivation of a single crop in a given area. So, of course, here you'll see in this vineyard, really in this plot of area, it is just vines that are being cultivated. So vineyards are being kept weed-free, and that's through things like ploughing between the rows and spraying with herbicides, things like glyphosate, for instance. And of course, that means it kills any competition there, and you're left with only one monoculture. You're left with your vines in place. The use of agrochemicals as well to control pests and diseases. Of course, this has been significantly increased. And I often say that this is kind of like pushing that big red button, the button that says war on it, and go to war or attack or launch the missile, because there is a problem that may arise in the vineyard. And the easiest way, really, in the latter half of the 20th century was just to press that big red button and to try and make the problem go away, maybe with a pest, a disease or whatever, but to spray the hell out of it. And this always reminds me of phylloxera. When phylloxera first started to rife its way through Western Europe, so in the 1860s, 1870s, 1880s, the first thought process at that time, and this is before, of course, the 20th century, the first thought process was to try and tackle it with chemicals, sulfur bicarbonate, for instance, to try and blow it up and get rid of it, instead of working with biodiversity and then of grafting, etc. as well. So it's very, very interesting. Also, an increase of mineral fertilizers as well. And of course, the use of things like the holy trinity of NPK fertilizers, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. So there've got to be advantages for this because, of course, a lot of the world has adopted this approach. So there must be advantages. So let's talk through those advantages. So the first one here, of course, is the ability to mechanize the work in the vineyard. And of course, this cuts back on labor, but many other reasons as well. So machines are able to pick large areas at optimum ripeness very quickly, or perhaps before a weather front even sets in. And this helps to prevent crop loss, but also could potentially mean that the consistency of the fruit is much higher. It's estimated that a machine can pick a hectare of vineyard in no more than 5 hours, whilst hand harvesting, in comparison, would take somewhere between sort of 1 to 10 days to harvest the same area, depending on the crop and the site and so on. Machines can also run 24 hours a day, and they can also, very importantly, pick at night when it's cool. And this is very useful not only in hot regions, but around the world to make sure that the grapes come in good health. The likeliness of oxidation and premature oxidation when the fruit is cooler is actually lower. So this will help protect fruity aromas within the wines. It really protects against things like oxidation, browning, and it reduces the cost of refrigeration at the winery as well. And even there's been research into this. So research done in New Zealand in 2011 found that machine harvested Sauvignon Blanc had higher levels of thiols. So this is the methoxypyrazine characteristic, which is actually often much more desired. The fruit is coming in quicker. Therefore, any remaining fruit that would be hand harvested may be left on the vine longer, where those methoxypyrazines have actually decreased too much. So it is important, certainly, for certain areas in the world. And another thing here is the reduction of competition from other plants. I've got a sort of a generic picture here, really, of a vineyard where there is grass near the vineyard, but around the plants themselves, where the root systems will be found, there is no competition. So this means that those vines in certain areas where they really need to lock in nutrients and water availability, the reduction of competition from other plants means that they'll be able to focus and get that nutrient and water when it was needed and when it is needed, certainly in very warm and dry places. Next up is the management of the vineyard. So this is easier to manage due to the fact really that the specific needs of each grape variety, that's the needs of the variety around irrigation levels, nutrient levels, treatments against hazards, pests and diseases, will all be easier to tap into because you are managing one vineyard with nothing else. And this in turn is able to increase yields, potentially of higher quality fruit, and thus reducing reducing costs as well. So, okay, we've talked about some of the advantages there. What about disadvantages of monocultures? Well, first up, we're talking about less disease and pest resistance. So any plants that are in a monoculture are much more prone to disease and pests as well. Therefore, they need more and more treatments as time goes on because of this. They become very reliant on the human chemical interaction. There is very little biodiversity within the ecosystem immediately around that monoculture vineyard, which means it really doesn't have anything else to rely on. It's really not that healthy. So that lack of biodiversity, and by biodiversity we mean other plants bringing in other nutrients, other sort of chemicals, and things like sorry, not chemicals so much, but other nutrients and other wildlife, for instance, and other things like bugs and so on, and creating a healthy ecosystem around that. And of course, when this lacks, there is many risks, because there's that lack in connectivity with the ecosystem, and therefore it's not able to rely on the adaptability of nature, but only the chemicals of mankind. So that's one thing here. It really does have very little resistance, so that's a very big problem. Also, things around soil structure and soil erosion as well. So in this instance, nutrients can be depleted as there are no natural ecosystems, as we just mentioned, to replenish the nutrients. Therefore, you are required to apply more and more fertilizers. So not only are you having to spray a lot more chemicals and a lot more fertilizers, it really is increasing the reliance on humankind here. And it's important to understand that viticulture is different to most forms of agriculture, in the sense that in agriculture, there's lots of crop rotations. And often you'll find that one field, year by year, is used for a different crop, and that's to maintain a balance within that ecosystem and in the soil specifically. And even remember, sometimes these lands will be left fallow to recover after intensive farming. This doesn't happen. Of course, it's very difficult to do this with very established vines, for example. So therefore, these soils can become very nutrient deficient with time, plus tractors, which are of course being commonly used in conventional viticulture, can compact the soils, and over time this leads to a loss of soil structure. And you'll see here you've got lots of surface runoff and soil erosion on the left hand picture. You've got huge cracks formed in this vineyard due to the erosion and the lack of water availability there as well. So all of this can also be linked to what we talked about on the last slide. So things around a lack of cover crops, for example, so competition, a lack of healthy humus, so your topsoil full of organic matter, and those compaction by tractors as well. There's been some studies around this as well. So at Padua University in Italy, Scientists have claimed that for every bottle of Prosecco that is produced, and we know there's a hell of a lot of Prosecco produced, around 10 pounds of soil is lost due to over-farming of the Glera grape variety. So that amounts to around 400,000 tons of soil each year. And the rate of soil erosion in the Prosecco land, so around Treviso, are 11 times higher than the Italian average. And if you think about the logics of this mass-produced sparkling wine that is really pitched at a very low price point, very competitive, of course, there's going to have to be conventional farming behind this to really minimize the cost. Tractors and, of course, mechanical machines getting involved. So this, of course, causes those big soil erosion problems. And also the debate over the environmental effects of this soil loss and soil erosion due to Prosecco really hit its apex in 2014, when a devastating flash flood in the region killed 4 people. And some believed that due to the massive expanse of the land and intensive farming and cutting down local ecosystems and woodlands to account for this farming, this is what caused the flooding locally in that area. Okay, so that's talking about soil structure, soil erosion, and depleted nutrients requiring more fertilizer. More disadvantages here as well. So residual chemicals can find their way into groundwater or the air and can create environmental damage. So here you can see Roundup, which is glyphosate. And glyphosate is this very intensive toxic chemical, which is used to kill many weeds, for example. And of course, you can purchase this for use at home, for your gardens and your patios and so on. This is used in conventional viticulture. The EFSA, which is the European Food Safety Authority, says that glyphosate is safe. However, most of their research is provided by the industry that created this herbicide. They haven't tested the various individual commercial formulations of glyphosate as well. And they say that the safety tests on mammals cover a short period, a maximum around 90 days, but no one knows the effect of long-term exposure to these toxic chemicals. And it's quite worrying because really these chemicals, which can include things like arsenic, for instance, and nickel, can actually cause quite distinctive effects to the body's endocrine system, so liver, kidney issues. So this can be a big problem. In terms of soils, there was an experiment done by Dr. Timaya, who's pictured here. And the test was on earthworms. And earthworms are mightily important to allowing lots of breathing in the soil. Of course, they're burrowing in the soil and creating a lot of, converting a lot of organic matter into nutrients that the vine needs very much. And of course, earthworms very important for composting. So he did some tests with glyphosate and earthworms. Sadly, if you're not very happy about this, sadly, some earthworms were killed in these tests. So the test was that because glyphosate say they are not harmful, or indeed the industry says it's not harmful, he tested glyphosate, and earthworms within exposure of about an hour of glyphosate started to secrete this very luminous green liquid, and within 2 hours they had died. Initially, when earthworms detect something like this, they will move away. However, in this environment, this was remarkably toxic for it. So if there is an overuse of things like glyphosate, it will possibly destroy earthworms, or indeed they may move on. So it can be a big issue. It also has been said that things like glyphosate trace elements have been found in drinking water as well. So this can be another issue. And finally, our last slide here is the impact on the environment. We've already we're kind of leading up to this point because we've mentioned a number of things around that. But really, by the late 20th century and turning into the 21st century, there was a big realization, an increasing realization that spraying pesticides on a regular basis and the routine use of mineral fertilizers were harmful to soil quality and soil health. They're also quite expensive because once you start this cycle, the soil, remember, and the environment becomes very, very reliant. So monoculture becomes very reliant on all of these inputs. So therefore, it's much more expensive and it's detrimental to the environment and potentially hazardous for vineyard workers and even the consumer, like I mentioned, with things like glyphosate getting into drinking water. So intensive fruit farming methods have become increasingly worried. So farmers of these methods have become very worried, and many grape growers, consumers, and legislators have started to adapt their local areas and legislation around it. In many vineyard regions, they are increasing the efforts to reduce the quantity of chemicals that are used, and there are a number of processes that we'll look at in the next video. So in the next video we'll look at sustainability, the video after that we'll look at organic, and the video after that biodynamic, which are all types of philosophies which some are certified, and you've actually got a list of them here in terms of what they mean in each of the countries. I'm not going to go through those specifically, but it does mean that there are laws and there is legislation and some limits in place to help regulate potentially the overuse of these agrochemicals and the problems with conventional farming. And with organic and biodynamic, looked at the next videos, you'll see that about 4.5% of world vineyards are biodynamic or organic, which is very small, meaning that we have a whopping 95%, which is conventionally farmed. So this is the real big one. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. I've added quite a bit more in this one. That, remember, is what WSET call flair. You need to add flair into your answers to get higher marks in your examinations. That means research and reading around the topic, something up to this point with WSET you don't need to do. Up to level 3, you really just need to read their book. But adding a bit of flair and a bit more further information and reading, like I have given you here, will help you very much in your examinations. As always, if you do have any comments, questions, or concerns, please do get in touch. You can comment on this video below on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe, please, by clicking the subscribe button, or you can get in touch via social media that you'll see at the bottom of every slide. But the real best thing you can do is you can visit winewithjimmy.com, where we have a huge amount of information there to help you with your studies, and you could subscribe to one of our packages. Thank you so much for your time. If you do find yourself in London, come and see me, because we've got wine schools and wine bars, so you can come for a class, a glass, or a bottle. I've been Jimmy Smith. Thank you so much.